In the grim heartland of Europe in 1995, a number of young girls disappeared. The events of the following year uncovered the most appalling series of crimes against children and revealed a country incapable of dealing with the perpetrators. Six families in Belgium would become involved in the tragedy from both sides of the country's cultural divide. In Flanders, Paul and Betty Marchal had a 17-year-old daughter, Anne.
I was an ordinary father with 4 children. I was very happy to work in my garden and to do cooking, and so I was not known, and I like it.
In August 1995, Paul and Betty Marchal allowed Anne to go on holiday with her friend Effie Lambrechts. They went with a group of schoolmates to the seaside.
We got a phone call, and it was one of the friends at the seaside, and I immediately knew that there was something wrong, because he was very disturbed and he didn't know what to say. He was really very lost, and even for a boy of 18 years, it's not normal. So I told him, what's happening? And he said, well, Anne and Effie went to a show last night and they didn't return this morning.
I had a feeling then that I had to go to the coast. It's about more than 200 kilometers from here. When we arrived at 5 o'clock in the morning at the coast, we went to the police station there. They told us not to worry. They told us that every time girls disappear for 1, 2, 3 days, because they will amuse them with boys. And I told them that couldn't be true, certainly not with Anne. When we gave them proofs that they couldn't have run away, they don't believe it and they don't search.
There was a policeman who told me not to watch TV so much. He said, you are watching Miami Vice too much, which is a police serial. And I said, maybe you should watch it and then you know what to do. He said, I have 20 years of experience. And I answered him, well, if you do have 20 years of experience, it's time that you are using your experience and do something about it.
Eventually, 3 weeks later, and without informing the families, the police started a search in the dunes.
The press phoned us, who said, you can see it on television. So we put on the television and we saw on the news how they search. And it was very hard because they were digging. And when you are digging, you look for dead people. And so it was very hard because couldn't they say, the police I mean, that they are searching.
It was all in vain. The police found no trace of the 2 girls. Charleroi, in the industrial centre of Belgium, home of Marc Dutroux. Dutroux had been released from prison after serving only 6 years of a 13-year sentence for the rape and detention of young girls. His neighbour was Claude Thiroux.
The first time I saw Marc Dutroux was at Montigny. He seemed very nice, straightforward, polite. He was well-spoken. I felt you could trust him. My first impression was that he would never do all the things he went on to do.
Claude Thiroux became involved with the police when they asked him to act as an informer against Marc Dutroux.
I became an informer after going to the police to make a complaint. I told them about Marc Dutroux. I'd seen Dutroux staring at little girls in my street, and I told the police about it. They asked me to get more information about him, about his family, his life, how he made a living. They wanted to know as much as possible about him. That's how it all started.
Dutroux was officially unemployed, but owned 4 houses in the Charleroi area. He asked Claude Thiroux to help him with building work on his properties.
Dutroux showed me 2 old underground water tanks he'd discovered. He'd dug down through the earth in the cellar and then broken into the tanks from below. I asked him what he was going to do with them. He said it was a good place to hide children for a while until he was ready to send them abroad.
A children's dance class in Liège in West Belgium. 2 school friends, Melissa Rousseau and Julie Lejeune, were filmed by their parents. In 1995, the girls had reached the age of 8.
Julie had come over to the house in the afternoon to play with Melissa. They asked me if they could go out for a walk, and they left the house around 5 o'clock.
The girls never returned. They were last seen by the motorway near the Rousseau's home. An hour later, Julie's parents arrived to join the search.
We felt straight away that it was serious, that something really serious had happened. My first thought was that we were going to find them dead somewhere, that a pervert had got them, and that we would find them lying murdered in a ditch.
We both started searching like lunatics. Instinctively, we knew something was really wrong. We searched the undergrowth through all the nettles and the thistles, but I never felt a thing, even though I was only dressed in shorts. The only thought in our minds was to find our little girls, or some sign of them.
We called the police because we didn't know what else to do. The police arrived. They started taking descriptions of the girls, what they were wearing and so on. That's how the investigation started.
Our first contact with the police, the contact we had that evening, wasn't bad at all. In fact, we welcomed the arrival of the police. We regarded them as the people who had launched the operation to find our girls. They would be our saviors. At about 11 o'clock, 2 officers from Special Branch arrived. But as the days went by, we began to realize that even these officers from Special Branch didn't seem to know what they were doing with the investigation. That meant we became even more worried and also disillusioned. Disillusioned with the way the police function here in Belgium.
2 years earlier, in Charleroi, the police had collected clear evidence about Marc Dutroux and his illegal activities.
One day we saw two young girls walking along the road, and he said, "Do you want to earn 150 grand?" I said, "Sure, but how?" He said that first of all we had to kidnap the girls and that he'd show me how to do it. I told him I don't go around kidnapping young girls, but he said, "Look, it's easy." He put his arm around his neck like this and put his hand over his mouth. Then he said, "You just throw them in the back of the van. They can't escape, but you can knock them out if you need to." When I told him I wouldn't do it, he told me I was an arsehole. He got angry and turned back to Montigny, where he dumped me off at home. As soon as I got in, I called the police.
But the police never passed the information on to other forces around the country. 2 weeks after the disappearance of Julie and Melissa, their parents were desperate.
Message aux ravisseurs. Nous n'avons toujours aucune nouvelle de nos deux petites filles, Julie et Melissa. Depuis bientôt 2 semaines, nous vivons dans l'attente et dans l'angoisse. Nous ne pouvons plus supporter cette attente.
Message à Julie. Julie, ma chérie, je ne t'ai pas dit assez je t'aime. On t'aime, on t'attend et on espère de toutes nos forces te retrouver bientôt.
Mélissa, ma toute petite fille, mon trésor, si tu pouvais m'entendre, je veux que tu saches que ta maman, ton papa, ton frère, toute la...
C'était pour nous notre... Our whole reason for living was to find out where the girls were. We wanted somebody to help us get news of them, either good or bad. We felt that the investigators weren't really interested in doing that.
The families expected the police to launch a major investigation to find their daughters. The reality was quite different.
En fait, ils n'ont jamais pris la disparition.
From the start, they never took the disappearance of the girls seriously. They just weren't prepared for an investigation like this.
Another
example was that the head of the investigation told us, and I quote, that the Julie and Melissa case was not a top priority case. An old lady who'd been mugged and had her handbag stolen was just as serious as the disappearance of our 2 girls.
C'est tout aussi grave que la disparition des 2 petites.
Despairing of the police, the parents finally decided to take the search into their own hands.
We made posters in lots of languages: French, English, Spanish, Italian. If friends were going to Germany, say, they would take German posters with them.
In Asia, Japan, Mauritius, we had posters in all the airports.
On avait choisi de faire les affiches.
We decided to make full-size colour posters. They attracted a lot of attention to the problem of missing children in our country. That annoyed the police investigators, because all of a sudden, the press became interested in the case.
After 3 months with no news of the girls, the Rousseaus and the Lejeunes could no longer control their frustration with the police. They publicly accused the authorities of concealing information and keeping them out of the investigation. Chief police officers and the director of public prosecutions came under fire.
Donc je vous fais une demande publique. Est-ce que mon avocat peut avoir accès au dossier?
J'ai vu votre avocat avant l'émission. Dès que je recevrai l'avis du juge d'instruction, je prendrai mes responsabilités.
C'est une belle partie de ping-pong quand même, je crois, non?
La toute dernière information, s'il vous plaît, Madame Rousseau.
Nos petites filles sont peut-être en train de souffrir. Il est peut-être en train de leur arriver quelque chose, ou leur est peut-être déjà arrivé quelque chose. Alors, est-ce qu'on ne sait pas aller un peu plus vite dans les discussions? Par pitié.
Vous vous adressez à moi, madame? Ah, tout le monde. Ah.
On était face à des structures.
We were up against the institutions, the police, the judiciary, the government. These institutions are like machines. They have no regard for ordinary human beings. All that matters to them is that their wheels keep turning. So when we appeared with our simple human arguments, they were shocked. It became a question of one set of ideas against another. That's why what started as a small news story turned into a social, judicial and political battle. We were making history.
Quelque chose d'assez historique.
Still convinced their daughters might be alive, the parents launched a public appeal for help.
We held a press conference, and we offered a large sum of money as a reward for any information which might lead to the girls being found. The press conference was shown with the four of us, but we didn't receive a single telephone call. Not one. That's something I'll never understand.
Claude Dutroux had seen the stories about the disappearance of the girls. He thought there might be a connection to Marc Dutroux and got in touch with his police contact.
I went to the police station and told them I was going to get in touch with the parents and give them some information about Dutroux. I didn't know if Dutroux had taken the girls, but at least it was a lead. But the police told me not to do it, and they really meant it. They said that I was interfering with the investigation, that it would cause problems, that they would never find any of the children if I did that. There was absolutely no way they wanted me to contact the parents.
At the end of 1995, 5 months after the disappearance of Julie and Melissa, Marc Dutroux was finally arrested and sent to prison for car theft. While he was in custody, the police searched the cellars of his house for evidence. Officers reported hearing children's voices, but didn't check further. The voices would turn out to be those of Julie and Melissa. Marc Dutroux was released from prison in the spring of 1996 after serving 4 months for car theft. There was still no news of the 4 girls who'd disappeared the summer before, the 2 8-year-olds, Julie and Melissa, and the 2 teenagers, Anne and Effie. And then a 5th girl disappeared, 11-year-old Sabine Dardenne from Tournai in the west. It was another part of the country, so another police force became involved in the search for missing girls in Belgium.
During
one of the very first meetings we had with the police about the case, we naturally decided to run checks on all the known sex offenders. We wanted to verify their whereabouts on the day Sabine Dardenne was kidnapped. During the session, we discussed all the possible suspects, and one name that came up was Marc Dutroux.
Le nom de Marc Dutroux a été donné.
At the next meeting, I wanted to know if the information I had requested about this man had been supplied. I was told the search on Dutroux had come up negative, so I gave up on Dutroux.
J'abandonne Dutroux.
Two and a half months later, in another part of Belgium, this time in the south, 14-year-old Laetitia Delhaize went missing. She was returning from her local swimming pool in Bertry.
I was walking back up the road when this van stopped. The driver asked me what was happening in the town square. I told him it was the 24-hour motorcycle race, but he beckoned me nearer as if he hadn't understood. Then he got behind me, grabbed me round the neck and threw me into the van. He gave me some drugs to take, but I spat them out. Then he gave me some little pills and a drink to swallow it all, a can of Fanta. I spat the pills into the drink, but it all started to fizz up. He took the can, drank from it and tasted the pills. So he gave me double the dose all over again. I went to sleep. When I woke up, I didn't know what time it was or what day it was.
Dutroux drove Laetitia 150 kilometers north to his house in Charleroi.
I was in a bedroom for 3 days. There was a cot in the room, a poster and a coat stand as well. I was in the bedroom half asleep when I heard a little voice. I wondered who it could be. I thought it was female, a woman maybe, but it was such a little voice I didn't know who it was. Then he introduced me to Sabine. She was very pale and miserable.
The girl Marc Dutroux introduced to Laetitia was Sabine Dardenne, who had disappeared 2.5 months earlier from Tournai. Dutroux told the girls he had sent out ransom demands to their families.
Dutroux told us that I wouldn't be going home because my mother had refused to pay the ransom. Then Sabine and I talked for a while, and immediately after that, he put us in the cellar.
Letitia's mother, Patricia Delhez, was asked if her daughter had run away.
Non, ce n'est pas la fille à fuguer, Nico. Toujours dans le coin avec les enfants, non? Pour moi, non. Le lendemain, donc, que Laetitia a été enlevée.
The day after Letitia was abducted, they did a reconstruction of the route she had taken and interviewed a lot of witnesses. A young man remembered part of the number plate of a van he had seen. His sister also remembered the van and how noisy it was. In this case, we were lucky. The investigators did a good job.
On a eu la chance qu'eux, ils ont bien fait leur travail, quoi.
The owner of the van was Marc Dutroux. He was arrested at his house in Charleroi. But Dutroux had hidden Letitia and Sabine in the cellar. When the police searched the house, they failed to find them. The girls were too scared to call for help.
We were down in the cage. Dutroux, I hate saying his name, had always told us that if we ever heard a noise, we weren't to listen. We had to hide immediately under the covers.
After a day of interrogation, Dutroux cracked. He took the investigators back to the house to show them where the girls were hidden.
I heard some noises. Sabine was writing something, and she kept saying, "It's okay, we've got time." But I could hear somebody coming down the steps. I was scared and I got under the covers. She was still putting her stuff away, so I kept telling her to hurry up because I was so frightened. Finally, she hid with me. I heard them opening the cage. I could hear voices and I thought they were coming to kill us. They opened it up and told us to come out. Afterwards they told us they were policemen, which reassured me a little, but I was still terrified. As I put my shoes on, I was trembling all over.
Je mettais mes chaussures en tremblant.
Autrement, et deux en même temps en plus. C'est formidable.
Alors là, ça a été.
I just went to pieces. I barely had time to gather everything together. They'd asked me to take clothes for her. She needed them because she'd been wearing the same outfit for 6 days. After that, you should have seen the speed at which we went up there.
The release of Sabine and Letitia gave hope to the parents of the other 4 missing girls. Could the 2 teenagers, Anne and Effie, and the 8-year-olds Melissa and Julie, also be safe and well?
Moi, je veux dire que moi j'y ai cru à ce moment-là.
It gave me new hope. I had always believed our girls might be alive, but now I was convinced. So I went into Julie's bedroom and tidied it up. I heard that Sabine had told her mother to bring fresh clothes. So I looked for some clothes that might fit Julie after all this time. I really thought she'd be coming home.
The first time that I heard the name Dutroux, I was very pleased, because for me it was like, you see, it's possible that girls are kidnapped and will live. Because Sabine, she was kidnapped, disappeared for 3 months, and she was alive.
Joy over the discovery of the girls was short-lived, as details emerged about what happened to Letitia in the cellar.
Mais alors, elle se souvient très bien que, donc, quand il a violé.
She remembered how he raped her, and how much he hurt her, how he crushed her hips and how painful it was. She told me everything.
Donc, on était face à une réalité
Suddenly, we were faced with a reality. Children really were being abducted in Belgium, and imprisoned, and raped. But was this the reality for our child, too? I retreated into my own little world, and closed up. It was all too much for me to take in. It was just too much.
After 2 more days in custody, Dutroux made a shocking confession. He told the police to start digging in the garden at one of his houses.
Out of the blue, they told us that they'd been excavating. They thought they had 2 bodies, 2 girls.
À 7h30 du soir.
At 7:30 in the evening, with all 4 of us together, and even though we were surrounded by other people, the investigator told us coldly that they had a leg.
On a une jambe.
They'd found a leg, but they still didn't know if it belonged to Julie or Melissa. The investigator put the phone down. About 10 minutes later, it rang again, and he told us it was definitely Julie and Melissa.
Oui, c'est Julie et Melissa. Et comme ça.
Et à ce moment-là, j'ai vraiment douté.
At that moment, I couldn't believe it. I thought it couldn't be possible.
J'ai tellement investi.
I'd invested so much faith, so much hope, and this was the response I got. I thought then, this shows there really is nothing out there. It's just not possible. Otherwise, it would surely never end this way. Everything was taken away from us.
Ils enlèvent tout comme ça. Hein.
As Belgium mourned, the terrible facts became clear. Julie and Melissa had been imprisoned for months by Marc Dutroux in his cellar. When Dutroux went to prison, in the winter of 1995, he gave an accomplice money and asked him to feed the girls. But while Dutroux was in custody, the man stopped visiting the house, and the girls were abandoned. They eventually starved to death. For the parents of Anne Marchal, who was still missing with her friend Effier, the news was a terrible blow.
It was a moment of terrible grief. I felt sorry for those 2 girls.
It was a day of losing a lot of things, because it was possible in our country that children were become toys for monsters.
As details of the way the girls died became public, grief turned to anger, first against Dutroux, and then against the authorities who had allowed it to happen.
Don't have firm news on that point.
The Minister of Justice, Stefan de Klerk, was the politician in the firing line.
No. What about the... to make some comments? No, there's no problem. I don't have to give comment on that.
As a Minister of Justice, I had to handle this case, and I did handle the case. And I have to take all kinds of decisions, not only to follow the case, to have contact with the parents, of course. I immediately went to see the parents again and said, okay, what can I do for you? Because I knew them already very good, because I met them several times in the year before. But I also had to take decisions on a very formal way, whether we should be represented on the funeral, whether we should stop activity for 1 minute in the whole country, for example, because the whole country was shocked.
Such was the public outpouring of grief that the two girls, Julie and Melissa, were given an unprecedented state funeral.
Je me souviens aussi qu'on a commencé à préparer. I remember when we started the preparations for the funeral. We wanted everything to take place exactly as we wanted it to. That meant that some of our decisions were quite radical. For example, we didn't want the royal family there because they'd shown no interest in us until now. We also decided, given the circumstances, that all the important people, the VIPs, the politicians, etc., should not push themselves to the front. They should mingle with the ordinary people, with our families and friends, and even keep their distance a bit. After all, as the country's authorities, they were collectively responsible for what had happened, so we asked them to show some humility.
In the morning we had the funeral. I was very anxious, very nervous, because I did not know what should be the reaction of the people around. And it was finally it was very quiet. There was only one people, and I still hear the shouting of one people who was saying, hypocrite, huh? So that only one man cried. So finally, I was quite happy that the reactions of the people were controlled. So.
The parents of the dead girls had invited Paul and Betty Marchal to the funeral.
It was really something extraordinary. It was unbelievable to see how many people were in the streets.
I remember the clapping when Jean-Denis embraced me, and it was a great feeling that we were there for each other. At that moment, their child was gone, definitely. Our was not gone, definitely.
Two weeks later, the Marchals learned of their daughter's fate. Her body, and that of her teenage friend, Effier, were discovered buried at another house in Charleroi. Marc Dutroux confessed that when he abducted the girls, he had given them away to an accomplice. After 5 weeks of abuse, they had been suffocated and buried in his back garden.
I do think that I understand what happened to her. I believe that it must have been really horrible. Because if I think back to the way she was, well, I think something like a sexual abuse must touch everybody very hard. But I think even more with someone who has never been in a sexual contact with a man, for whom sex was even still a secret.
in a way I'm pleased now that Anne is dead. I think, no, I'm sure it's better. It's better because when you have to live with such memories, I think it's better that you don't live anymore. And so I'm sure now that it's better that we didn't find her perhaps alive.
Four young girls had been caged and then killed in the most horrible of crimes. Now, in the full glare of the cameras, the parents were allowed by the Belgian authorities to visit the places where their daughters had been imprisoned and buried by Marc Dutroux.
I went there 3 times. I went to see the cage 3 times. I wanted to try to understand what it must have been like, to imagine it. I even found a little word she'd written. She'd written her name in pencil in the cage. I saw it and I recognized her handwriting. She'd written Julie. It makes my flesh crawl just to think about it. The space was 80 centimeters wide, 1.6 meters high, and no more than 2 meters long.
It was really a cage. Food was given through bars. There was no toilet. There was a bucket, which was sometimes so full.
When I saw that cage, when I saw the mechanism which opened the door and everything, I immediately thought it was unbelievable for Julie and Melissa to have been kept in there.
Revulsion and anger spread as revelations about the suffering of the girls became public. How could such appalling crimes occur in the heart of democratic Europe? How could the Belgian police and legal system appear so ineffective? The people demanded answers from the government. The country's justice minister, Stefan de Klerk, was forced to reveal details about the police investigation which pointed to a catalogue of incompetence.
Le 4 août 95, la BSF de Charleroi fait savoir que le même informateur confirme ses propos d'octobre 93. Et il ajoute que Dutroux offrait 150 000 francs pour l'enlèvement d'une jeune fille.
The government confirmed that a police informer, Claude Thiroux, had passed reports to the police in Charleroi for 2 years about Marc Dutroux's activities. These reports had not been circulated to other police forces around the country. Even Belgium's special branch had discussed Dutroux as a potential suspect, but never followed up the lead. The parents were coming to their own conclusions about the investigation.
The point is that Dutroux's name was put forward several times, and not just by one informer, but by 3. When it comes down to it, that means that my daughter could have been saved, but she died.
They didn't do what they had to do. They waited and waited days and weeks before they did what they had to do. And so, at that moment, Anne and Eefje lived. For me, these police officers are the reason of not finding our daughter.
The parents believe the police had deliberately turned a blind eye.
I think that in the Dutroux case, there was passive complicity in his crimes. What that means is that the police did nothing at all. Passive complicity supports the criminal system. It's been like that here for years. It operates alongside a police force which is weak on complicated crimes, but very strong on petty ones. This means the justice system looks like it's working and looks good, even when it isn't.
As the Dutroux case unfolded, it began to have a fundamental effect on the people of Belgium. They feared that something was rotten at the core of their country.
I want more justice, justice, simple justice.
We aren't safe at the street anymore.
Whole Belgium.
Whole Belgium.
It all came to a head with the announcement of the biggest demonstration Belgium had ever seen, a peaceful people's protest, the so-called White March.
Well, the White March was something that I think I will never forget, because it was so unbelievable. When we arrived in Brussels, the taxis had to stop in the middle of the crowd. You couldn't go ahead, you couldn't go back. It was unbelievable. I've never seen so many people.
We are afraid of what can happen in the future when justice does not work as we people hope.
The images of the white movement, children, people, parents, all together in white shirts with the white balloons, with the silence, with the white silence even. Those images changed my life, changed for a little this country.
How can I explain it? It was like triumphant, even if it was a sad event, because our children were dead, and yet it was all joy, and it was nice to see that so many people wanted to have things changed for the better, with no violence, all very quiet, all in white, all the beautiful flowers. It was really unbelievable, and I think the most memorable day in our lives.
Letitia and Sabine, the two girls freed from Marc Dutroux's cellar, were guests of honor at the White March, alongside the parents of the dead children.
It was very important for us that through the deaths of Julie and Melissa, we could widen the issue and demand proper protection for children in all senses of the word. We wanted the government and the judiciary to make children their highest priority and to keep them safe. That day we felt we were really supported and that we had become a powerful voice as far as the authorities were concerned.
Établir un rapport de force visible par rapport aux décideurs.
It lasted for hours. The population was really expressing something. We were all affected by the force of it, the solidarity, the warmth which reigned that afternoon in Brussels.
After the march, the government tried to placate the people by announcing a review of the justice system. The politicians hoped to put the Dutroux case behind them.
Yeah, it's clear that Dutroux has been the trigger of a process of a global change in our society, and I think everybody felt that it was a catharsis. Our justice system, police system, the whole society, the political class, we saw that they didn't cooperate and that we had to make a modernization of the whole system. And all this, with the white movement, we had a feeling of hope, saying maybe this is the final moment of breaking open a new era, a new century is coming on. And that's the important point. And the person of Dutroux is totally unimportant in this whole story.
Then the final straw. Unbelievably, Marc Dutroux escaped with farcical ease from 2 prison guards whilst on a routine visit to the local courthouse. Within an hour, Parliament came to a standstill, and the army was put on full alert. It was another shock for Dutroux's victims and their families.
J'étais dans ma classe. I was in my classroom, just sitting around on the teacher's desk with the prefect. The headmaster arrived and called me out. I asked what I'd done wrong. He said, "You haven't done anything, but your mother will explain." I was afraid and I thought something had happened to my granddad. Then we got to his office and they told me that Dutroux had escaped. I thought it was a joke, I didn't believe it, and started laughing. But then it sank in and I burst into tears.
I just thought, shit, Dutroux's got our address. He knows where I work and where we live. I felt really threatened, like I'm sure lots of other people did too. So I went into hiding.
Je suis allé me cacher.
At that moment, I realized, of course, that it was maybe the end of the government, maybe the end of the country, maybe the end, certainly the end of my job. This was one of the most emotional moments for me, of course, because we really felt that we had things in hand. We really managed the whole problem, and that the stupid thing who finished just said, "Okay, over and out."
It was indeed the end of Stefan de Klerk's job. After 3 hours on the run, Dutroux was spotted by a forest guard close to the French border. He gave up without a fight.
I realized at once that this was the next obvious step after all that had happened in the Julian Melissa case. This was just the logical continuation of it all.
Ce qui nous a le plus étonné.
What surprised us more about the Dutroux escape was the lightning reaction of the government.
Ça a été extraordinaire.
It was extraordinary. The population hadn't even had time to understand what had happened before ministers' resignations started coming in. It all happened so fast that in the end we had the impression that the whole thing had been very calculated.
C'était très calculé, finalement. Un autre épisode.
Just another episode in the whole affair.
I used to think the justice system was something to be taken seriously, that it really worked, and it was completely objective. That's what I thought. But then, I had never had anything to do with the justice system before this happened. Now, I have completely changed my opinion.
Maintenant, j'ai revu mon opinion.
Marc Dutroux has still not come to trial, although it is now 3 years since he was arrested. The investigation grinds on, plagued by allegations of cover-ups and incompetence. For the parents of the 4 lost children, there is only disillusionment and cynicism.
I have no faith in the Dutroux trial. It'll be just a piece of theatre. It's about telling a truth which suits the justice system, and that's nothing to do with the truth that we as parents are seeking.
I think it's very easy to point the finger at Dutroux in this country and even abroad, and to call him the monster. The problem is that the trial of a monster is no trial at all.
Pour la vérité, je suis contre le découpage. Je suis contre le découpage.
I could never believe that such people existed, but I have to believe it now. And I'm happy that all what happened to Anne and Eve here, and Julie and Melissa and Sabine and Laetitia maybe helped to get it all into the open. And then I say maybe the girls haven't died in vain.